The Mexicans had fired the first shot, but they had done what the American government wanted. Colonel Ethan Allen knew that. Even before the attacks, he wrote in his diary, I have said from the first that the United States are the aggressors, meaning they fired first, or they brought it on. We have not one particle of right to be here. It looks as if the government sent a small force on purpose to bring on a war, so as to have a pretext or a reason for taking California and much of this country as it chooses. My heart is not in this business, but as a military man, I am bound to execute orders. President Polk had been urging Congress to declare war even before he received word of the attacks from General Taylor. As soon as Taylor's message arrived, Polk told Congress, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon American soil. Congress declared war. Only a handful of congressmen voted against it. They were strongly opposed to slavery, and they believed that the war was an excuse to gain territory that would be made into slave states. Joshua Giddings of Ohio called it an aggressive, unholy, and unjust war. Many Americans cheered the news of war. They held rallies to support it in cities across the land, and they volunteered for the army by the thousands. The poet Walt Whitman wrote proudly in a newspaper that America knows how to crush as well as how to expand. Another poet, James Russell Lowell, took a different view of the war. He wrote a poem saying that the only reason for it was to lug new slave states in. Massachusetts writer Henry David Thoreau criticized the war. He was also jailed for refusing to pay a poll tax, but he only spent one night there. He was released because a friend paid the tax for him without his permission. 2 years later, Thoreau wrote an essay called Civil Disobedience. It talks about the difference between law and justice and about how soldiers sometimes know that the orders they are following are wrong. Law never made men a whit more just. By means of their respect for it, even well disposed are daily made of the agents of injustice. A common and natural result of undue respect for law is that you may see a file of soldiers marching in admirable order over hill and dale to the wars against their wills, aye, saying their common sense and consciences, which makes it very steep marching indeed. Many members and leaders of churches spoke out against the war. As the months passed, other voices joined in. Newspaperman Horace Greeley wrote in the New York Tribune that the war was unnecessary. Anti-slavery activist Frederick Douglass, who had once been a slave, called the war disgraceful and cruel. The anti-slavery paper, The Liberator, went even further, wishing the most triumphant success to the Mexicans. What about ordinary people? It's important to know how many of them supported the war, but there is evidence that some workers were against it. Many Irish workers showed up at an anti war meeting in New York City. They called the war a plot by slave owners. The New England Working Men's Association also spoke out against the war. The flood of Army volunteers slowed down after the first rush of excitement. To get enough soldiers, the Army was forced to pay for new recruits. It also offered land to volunteers if they served for the entire war.